Hi, welcome. My name is Matt Talbot. I am a local real estate agent here in Michigan. My team and I help people just like you every single day move here to Detroit, and we absolutely live for it. So, if you're tuning into this video, you live in Atlanta and you're thinking about moving to Detroit, Michigan. If that's the case, then this video is for you. We want to dive into some of the differences between living in Atlanta, Georgia, and Detroit, Michigan when it comes to the real estate, the cost of living, a little bit about the vibe here, and what to expect between Atlanta and Detroit, Michigan. We're getting a lot of clients that are moving back home or moving here to Detroit, Metro Detroit, Southeast Michigan from Atlanta, so we figured we would make a video specifically for people just like you. Number one on our list, we're going to start with the easiest one. This one's a layup. This one's a given. This one's like a duh. Everyone knows. We talk about it in a lot of our videos, but we want to give you specifics when it comes from moving to one city to another. And again, with all of our clients moving from Atlanta, we figure we would talk about the given one first, the easy one, the one that everyone talks about, and that's going to be the climate shift. So to read some specifics here, on average, there's 217 sunny days per year in Atlanta. Detroit averages 183, and the U.S. averages 205 sunny days. So we're below average. Atlanta is above average, and the average across the country is 205 sunny days. That statistic surprised me. Although there is a pretty big gap, it seems like it's a bigger gap if I were to guess as far as the amount of sunny days. But these are statistics that we pulled up, so that's what we're going to go with. 217 days worth compared to 183 days. So if the goal to move to Detroit is for sunshine only, do not do it. I promise you there's more sunshine in Georgia than there is in Detroit. Although we do have seasons, a lot of other things going on that we talk about in these videos without a doubt. But if it's for sunshine only, that is not the reason to move to Detroit. Up next on weather is going to be inches of rain. Atlanta gets 51.5 inches of rain per year. Detroit, Michigan gets 33.5 inches of rain per year. And the U.S. average is 38 inches of rain. So we're actually a little bit under the average of rain. We get less rain than Atlanta, which is interesting. Now, the amount of total rain compared to rainy, gray days, I don't know how that looks, but we do get less rain, according to this article, here in Detroit compared to Atlanta, Georgia. Amount of snow. So if you're moving from Atlanta, Georgia, and you're moving to Detroit, Michigan, that's one of the obvious differences. Atlanta averages just over 1 inch of snow each year, which I'm surprised that's even the case. And then up here in Detroit, we average 33 inches of snow. Now, across the country is 27.8 inches. So we only average about a half a foot or 5 inches more of snow per year compared to the average. So if you're thinking about moving to other places outside of Atlanta, Detroit's not the highest snowfall in the country by any means. However, there is a good amount of snowfall here in Detroit and Southeast Michigan. Now, you start heading up north. If you're moving to the upper lower peninsula, or if you're moving up to the upper peninsula, or on the west side of the state where you get all that lake effect snow, there's going to be quite a bit more snow, of course, than Detroit. But specifically, Atlanta to Detroit, or here in Southeast Michigan, there's a difference of 32 inches of snow. Of course, there's a lot more snow up here, and compared to the average, not a lot, only about 5 inches more compared to the average. I thought it'd be a little bit higher, but that's the stat. Up next, from moving from Atlanta to Detroit, is going to be reviewing the cost of living for you. Now, this is a little bit different, obviously, than the weather, which is a given. It's like a duh, like of course the weather's colder here in Michigan. Of course, we get more snow. Blah, 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 blah. Now, the cost of living is different. This affects a lot of people. This is something to strongly to consider. In fact, a lot of our clients moving here to Detroit are moving here to be able to work from home and be able to accurately understand the cost of living and the differences and where their dollar goes and how far their dollar goes. So this is a big thing for a lot of people, and that's going to be the cost of living. And so right off the bat, the cost of living in Detroit is almost 7% cheaper than Atlanta as a whole. And there's some important numbers to consider that I wrote down here to make sure that we can circle back to for you, because I think it's very important if you're thinking about moving from Atlanta to Detroit. One is consumer prices in Detroit are 26.3% lower than Atlanta. That's without rent. So the prices of consumer goods are 26%. So you almost save a quarter of your costs right there, or over a quarter of your costs right there. there just from moving from Atlanta to Detroit on your consumer goods. Consumer prices include rent in Detroit are 30% lower than in Atlanta. So overall prices, including rent, you're going to save about 30%. Rent prices in Detroit are 37.6% lower than Atlanta. So almost 40% less to move to Detroit from Atlanta, Georgia, as far as your cost of rent. So right away, you're spending less on consumer goods and you're spending a lot less on rent if you're thinking about renting in the area of moving from Atlanta to Detroit. And then restaurant prices in Detroit, Michigan are 27% lower than Atlanta. So the food's a lot more affordable. You get a lot more bang for your buck when it comes to cuisine here in Detroit. And grocery prices are also just over 20% at 22.5% less expensive than Atlanta, Georgia. So local purchasing power in Detroit, Michigan is 14% higher than in Atlanta overall. So you have a 14% higher purchasing power. Everything just about is less expensive here in Detroit from Atlanta. It is a more affordable city to live in. Now, of course, there's pros and cons to that. Atlanta, Georgia might be like the epicenter of the world right now for culture, with like what's happening with hip hop and all these different things in the world. It's just like I feel like Atlanta is just such a huge thing currently. I mean, it's been like that for a long time, but currently there's a lot of things happening. So of course there's a little bit of a trade-off. There's probably a few more things happening in that big bustling city like Atlanta, Georgia compared to Detroit. But here in Detroit Rock City, we know how to have fun. There's a lot of good things happening downtown as well too. You can still definitely have that city living here in Detroit compared to Atlanta, Georgia. A lot of our clients, about 90% of our clients actually, don't actually live in the city when they move back to town. They live in the suburbs as well too. So a reason why a lot of people are leaving a city like Atlanta to come back to Michigan is a lot of times being closer to family, to live a more slow pace of life, to live a more affordable life, and they're doing that in the suburbs quite a bit. So we work in Detroit, of course, but a lot of our clients end up moving to other cities because Metro Detroit is such a tight-knit area that we cover kind of a big footprint here in Detroit, and there's a lot of different places where people can choose to take advantage of. So some major differences between the city themselves when it comes to the cost of living here in Detroit compared to Atlanta, Georgia. Up next, or number 3 on our list of things to know when moving from Atlanta, Georgia to Detroit, Michigan, and that's going to be the overall population. So this is an interesting fact, okay? According to recent surveys, the population in Detroit is about 635,000, while Atlanta is only 496,000. So statistically, the city themselves, the proper themselves, we have about 130,000 people more in the city of Detroit. Now, the city of Detroit is a massive city when it comes to footprint. City of Atlanta, not sure if it's as big. So that could be one of the major differences. But now if you start to look in the general area, so the metro area, depending on how you define that in Atlanta and Detroit, the main metro area in Atlanta is about 6.1 million people compared to Detroit about 3.5. So there is a significantly more amount of people close to downtown Atlanta compared to close to downtown Detroit. Now, if you go a little bit further and you do all Southeast Michigan, we're upwards of 5 million people compared to 6.1 in the Atlanta proper there. However, of course, a little bit more congested towards the city of Atlanta. But interesting fact, within the city limits, according to the most recent census data, there is actually more people in Detroit, Michigan than Atlanta, Georgia, which is super interesting to me. But again, if you start looking about propers or cities just outside, of Detroit, there's a lot of different suburbs throughout Metro Detroit here. But if you talk about those close cities to Detroit, where not as nearly as many people as Atlanta overall, even though the city is technically a little bit bigger. So again, that just leads to more population, more people, more things happening depending what's happening, but the city themselves is interesting in comparison. Up next on our list, comparing Atlanta, Georgia to Detroit, Michigan, that's going to be the cost of homes. So in this video, we already talked about the cost of rentals, but we want to talk about the cost of homes themselves. So Atlanta, Georgia, on average is about $379,000 to $400,000, depending on the sources that you're looking for. And Detroit is more in that $230,000 range as far as average cost. Now, there's some other statistics out there. If you really were to dive deep and look at median costs and different stuff, depending on what you look for, you're going to find some different variety. Specifically in Detroit, there's a lot of homes that are being sold through land bank and kind of resales and different stuff that you're going to see on there. And if you average out a lot of those off-market sales, it could be as low as $60,000, $70,000. So people might think, hey, I can buy a house in Detroit for $60,000, $70,000. Not saying that you can't find a move-in ready house for $60,000, $70,000. It's just going to be a very low opportunity. So I like to look at averages in more specific areas. And if you're looking at Atlanta compared to Georgia, the way that I look at the statistics is really about $379,000 compared to about $230,000 in Detroit as an average. Now, something to consider, if you're looking for a very specific type of property, sometimes those things can be offset. Meaning, if you're looking for a condo in a specific part of Detroit compared to a condo in a specific part of Atlanta, maybe a like area as an example, the cost might not be as different as you think, although as an average, more often than not, it will be more expensive in Atlanta compared to Michigan or Detroit. So if you look at Georgia itself compared to Michigan, there's some differences there. Michigan on average, at least Southeast Michigan, is about $350,000 compared to Georgia, a little bit higher, about $450,000. So again, overall, less expensive homes here in Detroit and definitely Southeast Michigan compared to Georgia as a whole. But again, if you look at averages or if you look at the wrong data, that can be a little bit skewed. So talk to a real estate agent so you can get specifics on what you are looking for. Up next, when comparing Atlanta, Georgia to Detroit, Michigan, that's going to be recreational activities. So both cities have a good amount of parks and different things to do when it comes to the downtown area. They're both very diverse in the ability to put on community events and have different things happening outside as far as, runs and marathons and all that good stuff. But the major difference between Atlanta, Georgia and Detroit, Michigan in the metro areas here are going to be our lake living. So in Michigan, a huge difference that you're going to get when moving to Detroit or Metro Detroit, and that's going to be the amount of lakes that we have in the general area, whether if it's a short 30-minute drive from the city or upwards of a couple hours. There's so many different lakes and outdoor activities to do here in Detroit. I think it's going to be a major difference, a major pro of moving to the area if that's something that you're into. So if you're into the lake life, if you want to rent a jet ski for the day, or you want a second house on a lake, or you want to be able to go to a friend's cottage or whatever, Michigan is totally the place to have that when it comes to outdoor recreation, and including the winter. So a lot of people like to do snowmobiling and ice fishing and all that, and skating and all that stuff in the winter as well too. So there's a variety of things to do when it comes to recreation that you're not going to get from a city or area like Atlanta, Georgia, comparatively here in Detroit and Metro Detroit. Lots of lakes. You have the Detroit River downtown, Belle Isle you can go to. A lot of different things happening when it comes to waterfront properties and a lot of different waterfront things happening here in Michigan. So a major difference in recreation would be that lake life, that water living, and I think that Detroit definitely tops the cake when it comes to this, or at least Michigan tops the cake when it comes to this compared to moving from Atlanta to Georgia. It takes the cake. When I said tops the cake, I was like, that didn't sound right. I'm like mixing sayings here. It is takes the cake, tops the cake, takes the cake, takes the cake, it takes the cake. Got it. Up next on our list, last but not least, of course, is going to be the educational system comparing Atlanta, Georgia to Detroit, Michigan. In this section, we're going to specifically talk about the city themselves. So the city of Atlanta spends 18% more per student than Detroit. The student-teacher ratio is 22% lower in Atlanta than in Detroit. And Atlanta has 11.5% more residents who have graduated high school compared to the city of Detroit. So that's city to city. Again, if you start comparing metro areas and different school systems, that's going to give you different statistics. That's also public schools. So if you start comparing charter schools and stuff like that, there'll be some different statistics as well too. But those are the facts. And then next will be universities. So average in-state tuition for University of Michigan is $15,850 to give you an example. Georgia State University is $71.58. Out of state for U of M is $52,000. Georgia State University is $22,000. So if you start comparing U of M to Georgia State University as an example, it's more expensive to go to the University of Michigan. However, there is a lot of different examples of that here in Southeast Michigan. So something that we're really known for throughout Southeast Michigan are two major things. One is our large hospital systems. There's several of them. So a lot of people move to the area that are getting into the medical field, or are doctors or physicians or what have you. And then two would be the amount of schools here in Southeast Michigan. So University of Michigan we have here. We have Wayne State University, Eastern Michigan University, tons of community colleges. We have other videos out there about that. And there are very, very affordable school options here in Michigan compared to other places in the country. So again, comparing Michigan to Georgia here is a little bit difficult. I think that there are overall more schools here when it comes to universities and colleges in Southeast Michigan compared to Atlanta, Georgia. But again, we want to give you an example of comparing Georgia State compared to the University of Michigan. U of M is a little bit more expensive compared to Georgia State. However, there is a plethora of options if you're looking for higher education here in Detroit and Metro Detroit, Michigan. So if you're thinking about moving to Atlanta and you want specifics, you want a specific area to consider, you want to understand pros and cons, you want to understand where I should get a job, how close I need to be to family members, what have you, let us know. Send us a calendar link. We'll set up a call today or tomorrow or next week, whatever works for you. Specifically, if you're moving in the next 3 to 9 months, we got to connect today. So really a 6 to 9 month runway is ideal for us to have the best success story with our clients. We've helped over 500 families move in the area here in Detroit, Metro Detroit. We literally help a handful every single month. We'd love to help you out too. That's what we're really, really good at. Thanks very much for checking out this video. Make sure to tap and hit subscribe if this video provided any value to you.